Welcome to Time to Teach with Tammy, the podcast that gives tips, advice, and suggestions to teachers by a real teacher. So sit back and enjoy. And oh yeah, don't forget to subscribe. And we're back. Welcome to episode 59 of Time to Teach. Today's episode is entitled, Do Electronic Devices Really Result in Lower Test Grades? So let me just kind of give you the backstory on today's episode. I was reading through news and education, and I came across an article that I will link in the show notes called Electronics in the Classroom Lead to Lower Test Scores. And it is dated July 27th, 2018. Anyway, just kind of read through the article and kind of have quite a few issues with this article and in terms of what it's claiming, which I think is kind of normal. You know, they're scientists, psychologists, different persons in these fields will do studies and post them, and then all of a sudden you get the news coming out, or the media gets hold of it and kind of spins it one way, which they may be like totally believing that one study is so conclusive for everything. But I don't know, I just take issue with this. So today I just kind of want to look at the article. Again, like I said, I'm going to have it linked, and I just kind of want to dissect it a little bit. So let's go ahead and get started. Basically, the premise of this article is it basically concludes that having electronics in the classroom lowers test grades. So the argument is kind of more or less that electronic devices should not be in the classroom because they're distracting. And let me say, you know, being a teacher of 5 and 6 year olds, I personally feel like my own students need to be somewhat limited to electronic devices because a lot of what they're doing is for the first time. So reading and writing, and they need to know how to do those with the particular authentic tools that are hands-on. But that's not to say that I don't find electronic devices sparingly beneficial. I absolutely do. So just so you kind of know, like, my viewpoint, I'm not someone who for my particular student who I work with, I'm not, you know, super into having, you know, all electronic devices, but I think there is definitely a good balance. Okay, so let's look at this article first of all. Basically, it says that using electronic devices in the classroom can be distracting to students and lead to lower grades. So this is an article that was published in the journal Educational Psychology. So what they kind of did is they looked at a college, and I don't know if they listed what that college was. But anyway, they looked at a college of 118 college students who were enrolled in the same exact course, but they kind of separated them into two different groups. So they had two groups that are all taught by the same professor, taught using the same curriculum. Everything was the same. The difference is one group could have their cell phones and other devices, I think it was the laptop, and quote unquote open for non-academic purposes. Okay, interesting. And then of course the other group was not allowed that. So so it says, while quoting, I'll be quoting off and on through this, while the students allowed electronics didn't score lower on comprehension tests during lectures, they scored lower on exams at the end of the term. So they're kind of taking this and, you know, looking at the information they got by saying these electronic devices are non-beneficial. Okay, continuing on with the article, the study also found that students in the device permitting classroom who were not using devices also scored lower. So I think basically the premise of that is just seeing others on their devices were distracting to students. So I might be a student in this college classroom who's not on a device, but just being surrounded by the devices or seeing others on their devices are, you know, distracting to me, so I'm going to perform less. Okay, so so let me just kind of get into some of my issues that I have with this study. First of all, I find it was very limiting in the number of students involved. There were 118 students in one college. So I don't think 118 is a very huge number. It's in one location. So I feel like it's very limiting in terms of you're not really representing a large population with that. You're only targeting, and I'd love to see of the 118 students what ethnicities were being represented. You know, I just feel like that's so limiting. There's not much representation globally, so I think it's hard to say that the findings, when we're talking about that such a few representation, we can't say it's global. We can't say this is true for all college students, because clearly I don't think that's the case. 118 students in one college hardly represents a global student population. So that's kind of the first area that I take fault in that article. Okay, and then the other area that I take issue with is this was totally set up to put the students in a situation where their attention is away from the professor, the lecturer. So they were allowed to have their devices out for non-academic purposes. Okay, so I think anytime I'm supposed to be taking in information, but I'm like cruising the internet or doing something totally unrelated, obviously I'm not taking the information in. So I think obviously there's going to be an issue there. So you know, that's great. And I guess they were trying to mimic like the normal distractions that would naturally occur in a classroom, but in this case in a college classroom. And I think that's important to define that, because I almost feel like they're trying to relate this to all classrooms. They're trying to take this as an argument as to why there shouldn't be electronic devices in any kind of a classroom, so even like K through 12. But they purposely had the electronic devices available for non-academic purposes. Okay, so that's not surprising, is it? Is it surprising that if I'm supposed to be taking in information and I'm doing something else, that I'm not going to get that information? I don't think there's anything surprising about that. Why would that be a surprising? I think that, you know, maybe that was their hypothesis. I don't think maybe it said that in the article, but I'm guessing their hypothesis was that if they're on their electronic devices doing something else, that they won't be taking in information. I think that's logical. No surprise element there. So yeah, so that's an issue because it almost seems like I'd be curious to see how that was worded and relate to the students, because it said available for non-academic purposes. So were they specifically instructed to, use this time to catch up on your email, check your social media? How is that worded? And I wonder, is that authentic to college classroom? Because by the time you get to a college classroom, a lot of times you're paying, your parents are paying. There's a pretty high motivation to be more engaged with what's happening. So yeah, so that just kind of makes me question, how is that even worded to the students? And yeah, so, and was that truly authentic to what would happen? I think they want to mimic the normal distractions, but like I said, I think when you're at the college level, you have higher motivation to be engaged with the lecturer because someone's paying. Your parents are paying, you are paying. It's not free at that point most of the time, so it would not be in your best interest to be doing something else. So I just kind of feel like the way it was set up was for them to really get the results that they probably hypothesized they would get. The other thing that is not like an issue but interesting, and I'll read it again, is where they say, while the students allowed electronics didn't score lower on comprehension tests during lectures, they scored lower on exams at the end of the term. So it is kind of interesting. They still comprehended. So I'm guessing that comprehension test was taken with the material that would have been presented during the lecture while they were engaged in something else. So it is interesting that they actually could comprehend. Maybe it was material they would have already known without the lecture. I mean, who really knows? There are different factors that could have been involved, but that was interesting. It didn't affect their comprehension, but it did affect lower scores at the end of the term. Now, this for me just kind of goes into everything that I think is potentially wrong about an exam. If you've been listening for a while, and I'm thinking more in terms of K through 12, but if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you already know my sentiments towards traditional summative exams. I do not think that should be your only point of evidence. In my belief, you should be really taking in evidence on a daily basis, because you need evidence of what students know and comprehend and what they don't know and don't comprehend, because that's going to help you in your decision making in terms of your teaching and in terms of what your students need and opportunities for learning that you can grant them based on that evidence. So your evidence shouldn't be one exam. And that's where I find exams and tests can be very faulty too, because a lot of times, first of all, how is that exam even designed? Is it based on they needed to memorize something? Did they have to perform something? Usually a summative assessment isn't typically a performance assessment. And I think that's faulty, because if you're just trying to see what did the students memorize, their memory might not be great. Or maybe when they're taking this exam, they're in a high emotional state that is, difficult for them. So there's so many factors, and that just goes into why I disagree with looking at an exam as, this is your grade now for the term because of this one exam. I don't agree with that. And then lastly, I would say that I think this is also very wrong of them to try to imply that the electronic devices shouldn't be used in like a K-12 classroom because of what came out of this study of 118 students at one college. Because the learning method is primarily through lecture. So there's a big issue right there. The way they're taking in information. I think we know. I don't even really need to try to convince anyone of this. I think we know at this point that lecturing is not a very effective way to transmit. Well, it's an effective way to transmit information. Let me not say it that way, but it's not necessarily a good way to affect learning on behalf of the student. When you're just outputting all this information, the student is only going to take part of that. So that was faulty in itself, and that's where, a lot of college courses are taught that way. I mean, it's kind of a surprise that anyone gets anything out of the university when most things are lecture based. I wouldn't sit and lecture all the content to my 6-year-old. So I think it just goes to showing, well, of course they're not really engaged and they're distracted, because that's not the most effective way to learn something. You really learn the more engaged you are, the more that you're interacting with the content. So I just, of course they're distracted, and of course they're not going to do well, because my hypothesis is that they did well on the comprehension test because somehow they effectively took in information that they needed right then for their test, which is what happens with tests. And then by the end, it was probably a cumulative exam of different information throughout that term or the semester, however long the term was. And while they memorized things they needed for the test, they didn't necessarily retain everything by that end term. So am I surprised by the findings? Of course not. I think this is totally what would have been expected. Why would we expect anything else, for all the reasons that I've already explained? I just think the whole thing is just so bizarre. And then if I can read the end of this study or this report, many dedicated students think they can divide their attention in the classroom without harming their academic success, but we found an insidious effect on exam performance and final grades, Glass said in the release. To help manage the use of devices in the classroom, teachers should explain to students the damaging effect of distractions on retention, not only on themselves but for the whole class. And I do agree with that part, that the more that we teachers, regardless of what grade level, can relay that information, that's why we want to talk to our students about mindset, about working hard. So of course you want to talk to them about how damaging distractions can be, but I just think, and I don't know that in the psychology journal, the educational psychology journal, this was just a study that was published. I would guess that they're not definitively saying that this one little tiny study of this one student population is meant to be taken as, test scores go down, which, yeah, they might go down, and exactly why you don't want to base everything on one test. It's that so faulty in and of itself. But yeah, I seriously kind of doubt that the journal itself was trying to make that statement. I think it's kind of like what we see in any case. Whenever the news media gets a hold of a study, they just take it to mean that, oh, this is truth for everyone and everything. There's not maybe a lot of critical thinking going behind their reporting. They're accurately reporting the findings of the study, but what they're not doing is they're not asking those bigger questions and questioning that, there's only 118 students. Oh, it was only one college. Oh, the method of relaying information was through lecture, and that in itself is not effective. Oh, the students were asked to use their devices for non-academic purposes during the lecture. Like, they're not really asking those things. So someone who wouldn't be prone to asking those things, which I would make the argument that everyone should be thinking critically in all aspects. But if you're not critically thinking and you just read that article, then you would come to the conclusion that, oh my goodness, we got to get rid of electronic devices. So I take a lot of issue with this article that was put out. And it's put out on a website called usnews.com. I really don't know how many people are even reading it. So I don't know that in the large spectrum of things, this is affecting people's opinions or not, because it would be interesting to see what kind of percentage of what population is even reading this. And of that percentage, how many of them are critically thinking about what they're reading. But I read it and I just thought, you know what, I'm taking so much issue. Great topic for an episode. I do want to mention, though, as I was kind of researching this, you can find other studies online online studies that have been done that kind of come with the same conclusion. But a lot of what I'm finding, again, is the same scenario where it's done in a university setting, where the students are purposely set up to basically use the devices in a non-academic way. So I just think, of course, there's not going to be any surprise when it's done that way. So my final thoughts, what does this mean in terms of education? I think it means hardly anything, to be quite honest. I think that what they should do if they want to make a blanket statement in terms of general education, more research needs to be put into it, more studies, not just at the college level, but K through 12, and check to see, research to see if when these electronic devices are being used to enhance the information being put out for them, when electronic devices are being used to enhance production on a student's behalf or enhance their own research. I mean, my goodness, I have information anytime I want it due to my electronic devices. I have a question, I can quickly look it up. It's certainly enhancing my learning. So this study tells us absolutely nothing except that it's very faulty. It tells us that more research on electronic devices needs to be done in a more global spectrum. I'd love to see this kind of work being done through K through 12 and done in not just, here is an electronic device. Make sure you use it in a non-academic purpose during the time that your teacher's giving you information. I'd love to see lots of different angles of how electronic devices are being used for information purposes, for protection purposes, for research purposes, and see lots of different student populations being reached. And then maybe we have something to talk about. But until then, this one little tiny study tells us nothing. It absolutely tells us nothing. So that's it, you guys. I'm sorry if this was kind of took on a negative tone, but as you can tell, I was a little bit perturbed when I'm reading this, because I also feel like I'm putting myself as a person who might be like a parent or someone in the general population who's not in the field of education. If they read it and just take it as the article is kind of putting it out to be, it does irritate me a little bit, because I hope that nobody's reading this with an uncritical eye. And I know that's part of being we just have to think critically and we have to question things. We don't want to just read something and be like, oh, so that's the way it is. Always thinking critically about it. But when people are putting out this kind of information and not explaining all those other factors, there's so much room for things to be misconstrued, which I think could very easily be done. So yeah, this article for me doesn't do anything but tell me that there's so much more work and research that needs to be done. They told me nothing. I learned absolutely nothing from that article. So so basically we don't know, right? I find that electronic devices are enhancing to my own life, my own research. I listen to podcasts. I get information via that way. Whenever I have a question about something, like I mentioned, I love to research. So I'll go online and I'll research and I'll get the information and, sift through it, think through it critically. But I learned so much that way. So I just feel like we can't just throw out all electronic devices based on this little tiny study. I think that would be very, very misinformed of us to do that. Okay, so we're going to kind of end it on that. I really enjoyed kind of examining an article, and maybe I'll do more of those in the future. I don't know, but I did enjoy that. So maybe if you liked it, let me know. You can tweet to me at TammyJ123. That's TAMIJ123. And just let me know if you'd like more of that. Okay, to end today's episode, let's go straight into wins and fails for the week. So, win, you guys, I would say my win is that I'm feeling very prepared as I go into this next school year. I'll be returning shortly, and I'm sure I will have returned by the time this airs. But I've gotten a lot of things done in terms of pacing calendar, in terms of the macro units, and I'm also putting together a new version of our pre-first binder because I kind of felt like there was a need. A lot of things had changed at grade level and section wide and school wide, and I wanted to update our pre-first binder to reflect that. I also created a pre-first website where I am going to be putting a lot of information will be housed on there, so that teachers at our grade level can have the pre-first binder. They have the electronic files to that. They also will have the website, which is nice because then everything's housed and you can kind of quickly click through information that you want, and skip other things, which you can do in a binder too. I'm not saying you can't, but I just feel like it's going to enhance it's going to enhance our ability to more quickly and efficiently get to information, especially for a new teacher, which is really what this was kind of designed for. So so that is my win for the week, because, well, that's kind of a win for the summer, but it's a win that I'm reflecting on. Fail for the week. Had a little slight incident with my kidders. Okay, so I checked out a couple of our Marzano books because we grade level leaders will be leading a PLC, and we're kind of using these Marzano books to guide us, and we will be doing some training in the first, leading up, well, probably ongoing training on part of the grade level leaders, but that first week back will be kind of intensely guided towards that. So, I checked out a couple of the Marzano books. Well, the other day I was reading one of the Marzano books and I left it open on my bed. I stepped away. I've been drinking a lot of tea this summer, a lot of buttered tea, because I don't know if I've mentioned that I drink like a kind of my own version of bulletproof coffee. So I've been doing that with my tea, more like buttered tea. So anyway, I went to make one of these teas, and I came back to find that my cat had taken a bite out of one of the pages of that book. So I had to immediately email the lady who's kind of in charge of all that and explain and offer to pay, because you guys, I feel horrible. I just think if you rent something, check something out, borrow something, you return it in the same condition or better condition, which typically it's really hard to return something in better condition. But so I was just horrified to find that this happened. And she was very understanding and so wonderful and sweet about it. But you guys, I feel horrible that this happened. So I just have to remember that I have a cat now running around the house, and anything can happen, so I can't leave a book opened, apparently. So that was my fail for the week. I felt horrible about that. Absolutely horrible. I'm so thankful it was only one page, and it was just at the bottom of the page where she took a bite out of it, so it's not that the whole book is destroyed, but still, it's still one page, and that makes me feel less than happy about. Okay, you guys, so that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining me. If you would like to add your own thoughts to this article and just in general what you think about electronic devices in the classroom, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can reach me again on Twitter at TammyJ123. That's at TAMIJ123. Until next time.
Wait a minute. Wait 1 minute. Before you go, don't forget you can catch our show notes online at www.timetoteach.libsyn. That's libsyn.com. We're also on Facebook at Time to Teach. Don't forget to check out our Facebook group, Teachers for Effective Curriculum. And if you're an educator with your own podcast show, I invite you to join our brand new Facebook group, Teachers Who Podcast. Let's grow a community where we can network, problem solve, and discuss anything and everything podcast related. I'll see you there.